I am Chad Berginis, Executive Director of the Association of State Floodplain Managers. And we have a great panel that I think fits very well with the theme of this year's conference, Making Room for Floods and Fish. And so to maximize the amount of time, we're going to go right into it. And I want to introduce our first speaker, Ellen Gilinsky. And Ellen has served since 2011 as the Senior Policy Advisor to the Acting Assistant Administrator for Water at the Environmental Protection Agency. In this position, Dr. Galinsky addresses policy and technical issues related to EPA water programs with an emphasis on science, water quality, and state programs. Prior to this appointment, she spent 7 years as the Director of Water Division at the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality, where she supervised a diverse array of water quality and water quantity programs. Among her other professional accomplishments, she was a past president of the Association of Clean Water Administrators, held a gubernatorial appointment to the State Advisory Board of the Virginia Water Resources Research Center, and was an adjunct facility member at the Virginia Commonwealth University in the Departments of Biology and Environmental Studies. Ellen.
Thanks so much for inviting me to be here today. This is quite an impressive conference. I didn't realize I was going to be speaking to such a large room, but those people who know me know I never have trouble speaking. So really I'm glad to be here today. And what I want to emphasize, I sort of have a little bit of a hodgepodge of topics to talk to you about, but they all center on the fact that floodplains matter to us at EPA. I know they matter to everybody in this room, but we do a lot having to do with floodplains at EPA, and again, delighted to be here. Alrighty, let's see, there. So floodplains play a very key role in the Clean Water Act. So the Clean Water Act goals are to protect the physical, chemical, and biological integrity of our nation's waters. And we all know that floodplains and riparian areas play a very important role in that. They help connect the upland and aquatic environments, remove pollution, filter out pollutants, recharge groundwater, reduce storm surges, slow runoff, and provide really valuable habitat, again, the theme with fish and floodplains, and also increase resilience to climate change, which is very important as well. So again, preaching to the choir here, we really believe floodplains have a lot of importance in Clean Water Act programs. EPA water, I want to talk about our EPA programs that affect health and management of floodplains. And I'm going to start with telling you a little bit about our Waters of the U.S. proposed rule, which is very relevant to those to this organization. Also talk about climate change, using natural infrastructure, healthy watersheds, and then some of the work we're doing with our federal partners, including those sitting up here with me. So protecting waters of the U.S., again, that's a key role of EPA. And streams and wetlands are major economic drivers. They're important for recreation, for fishing, hunting, agriculture, energy, manufacturing, and aesthetics. Drinking water, just goes, I can go on and on. And again, floodplains play a key role in protecting waters of the U.S. So under the Clean Water Act, the scope of Clean Water Act jurisdiction affects what programs we can do at the federal level. And the Clean Water Act covers navigable waters of the United States, but it doesn't really define what those waters are. And that definition has really is critical, but it's been the subject of a lot of court decisions going different directions. So it just adds to a lot of confusion about what's covered, what's not. And a lot of state coverage of programs depends on what the federal coverage is. Some states have their own definitions of waters of the state, but a lot of states depend on their definition, on the definition of waters of the U.S. So a lot these court cases have muddied the waters as to what's covered. So EPA just this past, I forget the date now, but I think it was in April, proposed a Waters of the U.S. rule to clarify what that term means. We have based the definition on science. I'll talk about that in a little bit. It defines waters of the U.S. for all of our Clean Water Act programs, our wetlands programs, our NPDES discharge programs, programs for funding. Everything depends on what the waters of the U.S. is. This definition, as I said, brings the latest science to bear and ends up protecting most seasonal and rain-dependent streams, because those headwater streams are what are so important for downstream waters. Also, the science tells us that waters near rivers and streams, which includes waters that are contained within floodplains, are very important to the integrity of the stream-river system. So those are covered under Waters of the U.S. as well. And then there's other types of waters that are protected on a case-specific analysis, because we can't really generalize. And those would be things like prairie potholes, playa lakes. We call those other waters, waters outside of floodplain and riparian areas that may or may not have a direct connection to the tributary system. And also what we've tried to do in this proposal is to clarify what are not waters of the U.S. Before it was just like, well, if you're not listed, you're not covered. But what we've done here is actually list waters, certain types of waters that are not covered, like waste treatment systems, prior converted cropland, ornamental water features that are so popular these days, including in people's backyards and things like that. So we're really just trying to provide a lot of clarity. Let me talk more about the wetlands near rivers and streams that are protected. So again, we note the importance of floodplains in the riverine system, but one thing that has been circulated in the press is that EPA is now regulating floodplains. Okay, that's not under this Waters of the U.S. rule. That's not true. As you all know here, many features of floodplains are upland features, including the soils. They're usually very well drained soils, which would not be characteristic of wetlands. But what we're doing is we're saying that any wetland areas or streams, even intermittent streams or ephemeral streams within floodplains are part of that contiguous network that is regulated. So that's an important distinction. If you do hear that, I'd appreciate your getting rid of that urban legend. We actually, in the Waters of the U.S. rule, we actually define floodplains, and we'd be very interested in what the folks in this room think about that definition, and I'm sure you'll be weighing in on that. I know Chad and I were discussing that before this session. So the Clean Water Act defines waters that are adjacent to traditional navigable waters to be a waters of the U.S., but that term adjacent is, I think, what ended up in the courts a lot because it wasn't very clear. So now we say adjacent means bordering, contiguous, or neighboring. And the term neighboring can also be confusing as well. So we actually define neighboring as including waters located within the riparian area or floodplain that have a hydrologic connection to a jurisdictional water, to a tributary water. And then we further define floodplain as an area bordering inland or coastal waters that was formed by sediment deposition from such water under present climatic conditions and is inundated during periods of moderate to high water flows. What we try to do is we don't want to define floodplain as a 100-year floodplain on a FEMA map or something like that, because we want to have a more functional definition, and then best professional judgment can be used when out in the field. The Corps of Engineers typically does jurisdictional determinations, so they would decide if it was actually a floodplain or not. But in this case, it's really not the 100-year floodplain that's relevant, it's the floodplain conditions that create that neighboring situation where you have that interconnection of waters and movement of organisms and things like that that create that network. So I mentioned that the proposed rule uses the latest peer-reviewed science. Some of you may be familiar with this report a draft report EPA put out called The Connectivity of Streams and Wetlands to Downstream Waters. And what that report did, our Office of Research and Development reviewed over 1,000 peer-reviewed and published papers. So this is all things science that has already gone through peer review and publication that related to the connectivity of streams to downstream waters. And it included floodplains, wetlands, open waters, and non-tidal streams from headwaters on down. And that report came out. We also had our scientific advisory board review it, and they're going to be producing a report this summer about their review and recommendations. And all that's been open to the public. Some of you might have listened in on some of the sessions or seen some of this, but by the end of this summer, we will have the recommendations of our scientific advisory board, and then we'll go back and make revisions to the proposed rule depending on their conclusions on the science. So the rule will not be finalized before this report is finalized. So let me just tell you a little bit about some of these conclusions. I don't think they'll be surprising to those of you in this room who are probably familiar with some of this literature. Streams are really hydraulic highways and from the headwaters on down, and headwater streams, which can be ephemeral or intermittent streams, perform valuable functions. That's where you start nutrient processing, where there's organisms that flow on down. So if you get rid of the headwater streams, that's going to affect the physical, chemical, biological nature of downstream waters. And that's what we mean by that connection. So all tributaries are connected. And that's what we're basing this new Waters of the U.S. definition on. And the wetlands and open waters that occur in riparian areas and floodplains are also an integral part of this tributary network. And this is really the first time that we're actually saying that clearly in a rule. So again, it's going to be important for you folks to take a look at this rule. This just goes on talking about how floodplains are connected, which I believe I already went over. So the comment period is open on this proposed rule till July 21st. We've had a lot of requests to extend the comment period, and we'll be making a decision on that shortly. We really want to hear your comments. We're available to answer questions. I was saying to Chad that we'd be happy to meet with your water committee or whatever to answer any questions. The rule itself is only like 3 pages, but the preamble is like 200 pages. So it's a lot to get through, and it talks a lot about floodplains. So if we didn't get something right about floodplains, please tell us. One reason why Waters of the U.S. and defining it is so important is for our work on climate change. You all know here how climate change is affecting floodplains. We're getting more storm surges, we're getting more inundation, and being able to have that resiliency and protecting our floodplains is even more important as sea level rises. Climate change is really important in this administration. President Obama has really come out very strongly. We have a climate change action plan that all the federal agencies are participating in. On May 6th, the president released the U.S. Global Change Research Program's national assessment of the impacts of climate change on the U.S., and it explicitly stated that climate change is overwhelming the capacity of ecosystems to buffer impacts of extreme events. Again, we need to be very serious about working on climate change. So each agency is a part of the President's Climate Change Action Plan, and at EPA we're taking particular strides to build stronger communities and infrastructure, protect natural resources, and use science, and coming up with our specific plans on climate change. One example is climate change estuaries, and of course we're here right on one of the country's most important estuaries, Puget Sound. We're working with our 29 national estuary programs to develop a risk-based approach to climate change. We have tools that can help estuaries assess their climate change vulnerabilities and support demonstration projects and develop and implement climate change adaptation strategies. And so very important work that we're doing. That's just one of the many things we're doing on climate change. Another thing that's important in resilience and important to floodplains and management of flooding is using natural infrastructure to manage stormwater. So I want to talk just a little bit about some of the things we're doing. Yesterday, when I arrived, we have a regional office here in Seattle, and they took me around to look at some local green infrastructure projects, and I am just so impressed by the community support around here for using this green infrastructure, rain gardens, things like that to control flooding. We went to one neighborhood where the street joined together. They had been having flooding problems where they couldn't even park in front of their houses because the street was flooded. The town is actually below sea level and very flat. And they all banded together and they got the city and the county to work with them to develop a green street. And they put in rain gardens and gravel areas and pervious pavement in their street. And first of all, it's beautiful to look at. It looks like an extension of everybody's yards, but it's also it helps with flooding, and they're not having flooding anymore. So those are certainly things that we want to incentivize and develop grants to work with cities. And of course, very important to mimic pre-development site hydrology. We promote policies to protect water quality from stormwater impacts. And we've been using FEMA's models to estimate avoided annual flood losses from using LID to show communities how they're really going to save money in avoiding flooding if they put in these low impact development processes. And just here's some more example of green infrastructure that reduces flood risks and saves costs for communities. So we're really working to get the word out and working with organizations such as yours and with NAFSMA to get this word out to communities. And when I asked the folks I met with yesterday, what we could do that's most important, they said, get us funding. We want to do it, but we need the money to do it. You got to make it economical. We also have a program to protect healthy watersheds, which we can't just always be cleaning up. There we go. Whoops. We don't want to always be in the mode of cleanup. We want to protect good watersheds, protect their floodplains, protect the river systems. So we do have a program where we work with localities. We have a grant program where they can nominate watersheds that are healthy and then protect those watersheds so that they don't get degraded further on. So we're very excited about that program, and we work very closely with the states and localities on that. We also work with our federal partners, as I was alluding to, the people up here, FEMA, HUD, the DOTs. I heard earlier Dave Miller mentioned the FIFMTF, which I didn't know what that was either, but I'm on it now. So that's a great group where we get all the federal agencies together to talk about areas of mutual interest and responsibility with floodplains. We also have a memorandum of understanding with NAFSMA to promote sharing and knowledge about implementing green infrastructure and low impact development approaches. The EPA FEMA MOU incorporates strategies to encourage investment in solutions, creating sustainable values while reducing losses. And we're working with FEMA to revise the state hazard mitigation plan guidance. And then the EPA HUD DOT partnership, Rebuild by Design partnership, works together to direct funds to look at recovery after flooding events. So obviously, Hurricane Sandy is something that's occupying our minds right now, and we're working to rebuild, but to design things better. Don't just put it back the way it was. Design it to be resilient to climate change and to flooding issues. We also work with the National Drought Resilience Partnership, and USDA and NRDC are very active in that. Drought is occurring everywhere. Of course, California is the most visible right now, but we want to be resilient to droughts all over the country. So we're working together on that, and floodplains are important in that respect. We also are working on the principles and guidelines, which is, these are guidelines for federally funded federal projects that involve water resources. And what's really neat is that for the first time that these guidelines recognize wise use of floodplains in them. And that was something that the agencies worked together to get that into the guidelines, to try not to build in floodplains if you can help it. And then finally, there's a local partnership in the Puget Sound estuary, and I'm going to be visiting this on Monday. But there's floodplains by design. So through our National Estuary Partnership, we're directing funds to restore floodplains that protect the estuaries. So that's a very exciting partnership, and the state of Washington has directed a lot of money toward that, and we're working in conjunction with the state. So just in closing, floodplains matter at EPA and everywhere. They have so many important functions. Protecting and restoring natural resources and functions of floodplains is critical when we look at things like climate change and resiliency and quality of our waters. The proposed Waters of the U.S. rule recognizes the importance of floodplains in the entire tributary system. And we can't do it alone. We've got to work in partnerships, and I think it's great that we have so many federal partnerships and partnerships with states and locals to work on the importance of floodplains. So thank you very much, and thanks again for inviting me here.